But if you were to somewhere in my house, so our house is a mess all the time. That's just the beauty of having small children. You can have a clean house or you can have kids, essentially. And so we've said kids. We'll take kids for 2000, Alex. And so our house is always a mess. And somewhere in our living room, we have these two, I guess they're not quite bookcases. They could be. But on one of the shelves, there's maybe two rocks in particular. And if you were just like a random person just coming into our house and you saw those rocks, you wouldn't think anything about it. You just think, okay, there's just two rocks on a stone or on the shelf, and maybe because some of us are spiritual people, we might be like, oh, there's some sort of spiritual significance to these stones or something. Like, what do they mean? What's the intent behind them? And why, if not, why aren't they just outside? But the story behind those stones actually is that I got those from a beach outside of Bono's house in Dublin, Ireland. So the story goes as such that a group of us. This would have been a couple of years ago. That a number of us we were going to Ireland to visit Brian and Stacy and Elisa and the team out there, just as like a staff retreat. And Simon, one of the network leaders there, knew that Jeremy is a huge U2 fan. And of course, U2 is Irish. And so on one of the nights, I don't know if it was our last night there, but he took Jeremy and myself to where Bono lived. Essentially, he's like, I mean, it's Ireland, so they're not like losing their minds over Bono the way that maybe we would here in America. But they're like, yeah, he's just a regular person. This is his house, and of course, it's gated off. It has these massive gates, and if you like flash the light on it because it was nighttime, you could see like artwork and etchings and all sorts of stuff. But essentially, we were looking at his house, and next to his house, there's this tunnel. And the tunnel takes you out to the beach, and I'm sure the beach actually has a name. I don't know what it is. But that beach essentially is just lots of rocks. And so there we were on the beach outside of Bono's house, kind of looking at his house. And it's just this, I don't know, there was something about that I was just like, I want to take some rocks from here. And so I just took two rocks from that beach. Um, and so, in a way, they're just rocks, but at the same time, they're not that, you see? Like, it's more than just the rock. It's a symbol, it's a reminder of something else. It's a reminder of U2. It's a reminder of, I don't know, misadventure in a foreign country. It's a memory of Jeremy, like Jeremy being maybe the happiest I had ever seen him genuinely, like kid on Christmas happy. Uh, and it's a reminder of that community, Urban Junction, this small, humble group of believers doing their best to be faithful to Jesus in a country that has its own religious problems and troubles. And looking at the passage this week, I couldn't help but be struck by the image of stones. And stones are such mundane things. They're almost pedestrian. I mean, we rarely ever think about them. We see them on the street, we see them on paths, we walk by them, we walk over them. Maybe if we're by the water, we might skip some on the water, and that's about as much as we think about. Occasionally, we might admire a stone for its smoothness or for its size. We might even be taken aback by something like gemstones, but largely, stones are unimpressive. And yet, Peter uses such a pedestrian image to talk about something eternal. As trivial as the image of stones may seem, they matter because of what they point to, what they represent. Because the builder, what he's building, and for what purpose. A stone on its own is just that, but if you get enough stones together, you get temple. You get something else entirely. And maybe the word for us, as I was thinking about this year and asking God, okay, what is it that we're supposed to do or be? I just felt like, man, maybe in the infinite game of God's mission, maybe the best thing that we can do is play our part by being the fullest version of the living stone that God has made us to be in the temple that He's constructing. Now, earlier we were talking about the temple, but if you were to track the development of the temple over the course of Scripture, it's kind of an interesting journey. I mean, so we're talking about Genesis 1 and 2. That is temple text, essentially. That God, his home is creation, right? He's trying to dwell with man. He appoints Adam and Eve as priests in that temple to work and to keep the Garden of Eden. This is temple language, because essentially what happens is as the temple gets constructed, what is the mandate of the priest? The priest is called to work and to keep the temple. So there's that thing that's happening. And so there is, of course, we go to the tabernacle, maybe the first iteration of what would be eventually the temple. And it's the center of the camp. It's where there's this understanding that, okay, God, it doesn't just dwell. He's not like confined to this space, but something about this temple represents God's presence amongst us. Like it is a way in which heaven and earth overlap and intersect with each other in this place, in this temple. And so we just need that reminder that God is amongst us, a symbol that actually all of creation is his and his dwelling place. And of course, we look at Solomon and his temple and how it gets destroyed, and later the second temple that gets constructed, and then Jesus comes, and Jesus is God's presence on earth, and so Jesus himself kind of calls himself the temple, right? Confronts that second temple, says, I am the embodiment of what this thing is supposed to be, and in a crazy plot twist that none of us could have predicted, after his resurrection, the Holy Spirit, we become mobile temples. We become a place where God dwells. A representation that actually all of this is his. It represented God's home on earth, where he rules and reigns. And Peter's not just talking about individuals here, but he's talking about their community. They are all living stones come together to make a holy nation, each of them unique in the role in which they play. A stone on its own is just that, but you get enough of them together and you get the temple. And so it is with us. Maybe a microchurch on its own is just that, but you get enough of them together and you have something else entirely. You have a network built together to create a kind of temple. Next week, we're going to look at kind of what makes us the temple that we are. But, I don't know. I think what I love about this is that there's something humbling and inspiring to me about that. That like the underground, even the underground, is just a living stone in the temple that God is building. We're not the whole temple, but we have a valuable part to play in it. And can we do that? If you've been around long enough with us, you've probably heard us talk about Simon Sinek and the infinite game. And so there's maybe two different kinds of games, right? Gaming theory. There's finite games and there's infinite games. Finite games are what we are most familiar with. There's a winner, there's a loser, there's rules and known elements that make the game work. Think about baseball. We have rules for baseball, and there is a clear winner and a loser at the end of baseball. And so that's how finite games work. But infinite games are different, right? There are no winners and losers. The point of an infinite game is just to keep playing. That's the point. The game existed before you and will exist after you, and really you were just happy to be part of it. So I think maybe an obvious version of that, or maybe an example that we've used in the past, is something like Minecraft. Right? Like, there's no winning in Minecraft. You keep building, you keep constructing, you play your part in that game. And I think for a long time, as I look at my sort of ministry career, there's a way in which I approach ministry and mission as a finite game. I think about my days on campus as a campus minister, and there's a way that I kind of saw it as a competition. Whether or not I would have said it, I felt that way. Like anytime that somebody said, "Oh, we're thinking about starting a campus ministry on this school," I was like, "Who are you? Who gave you permission? Don't you see that we are right here? Who are you to move in on our students? What's wrong with you?" It was fine if there was a pre-existing group. It was what it was. But even then, in my head, I was thinking, well, we're bigger, and we do more mission, and we have more Bible studies, and we're more multi-ethnic than you. And so we win. There are rules that I was playing by in my head as a student. And what's interesting is that the day I stopped doing campus ministry is the day that I realized how ridiculous that was. Did I really think that our 100 students was going to reach the 6,500 students on our campus? And even if we did I think that all 6,500 of those students were going to find their home in our community? We needed as many campus ministries as we could get because ministry and mission weren't finite games. They existed long before us and would exist long after us. We were just supposed to keep the game going. I think about, us in the underground, and maybe at one point I would have had some notions or feelings towards prevailing model churches and mega churches or whatever. But you know what? Praise God for them, actually. Because they also have a role to play in this infinite game. They are also a living stone in the house that God is building. All I've been thinking about this week is how the underground, how our microchurches are living stones in that temple that God is building. We are not the temple, but we are a piece of it. And the question that I've been mulling over is, what does it look like for us to play our role well? What's interesting is that depending on who you ask, some people would say that stones and rocks aren't exactly the same thing. This is new to me, all you geologists. There you go. You know this, I didn't. But apparently, some would say that stones come from rocks, that they are smaller pieces, smaller fragments of this larger thing that is maybe can be immovable to a certain extent. And so stones by their nature are a bit smaller, which I think is fascinating that Peter would use the image of stones, and stones being possibly smaller than just rock. And stones, this is really dumb, but stones aren't concerned about their size. They aren't concerned with their placement. There's no comparison to another stone. They just play their part. In fact, for those of us who build stuff, you need different size stones to actually construct something. Because if you get different stones together, there's going to be gaps. And so you need smaller stones to fit the gaps that maybe other stones couldn't quite reach. We don't always see it that way, do we? We get caught up in the comparison game. We get tired from pouring ourselves out on behalf of ungrateful people, and then when our lives spiral out of control, it becomes even more difficult to hold on. We look at our microchurches and they seem so small, not just in comparison to maybe other ministries or in comparison to the evil that we're experiencing, but they also seem small to us because they can feel so very ordinary. Right? Sometimes we feel alive, but a lot of times, it's dinner and a Bible study in your house. And there's nothing amazing, mind-blowing about that necessarily all the time. It's the same egg bake from last week, every week. And yet, somehow, some way, there's something transcendent happening here. Sometimes we can wonder how come our ministries can't look like that other ministry, or why we can't be like that leader. And I think at the heart of it, it's a disconnection from the living stone, the cornerstone, who the whole temple is based on. When we look at ourselves or others, we lose our focus on Jesus, and because of that, we wither. Rather than looking to the cornerstone of the builder or remembering the temple, we get stuck on being the stone next to us. And that is detrimental. I want to show us a video. I don't have a whole lot of context for this video. Before I hopped off of social media, I saw this and thought it was hilarious and said, I want to use this for something because it feels important and true in some way. And so, apparently this kid is a sensation in his country. You might have seen this video. I have no idea. But apparently his sister was supposed to have like an end-of-year dance recital. And I guess somewhere during the point of the recital, his brothers and sisters called him on stage to be a part of this number. And essentially, this is what happens. I think Sherry has it loaded. We're not going to show you the whole thing. It's like 3 minutes long, but he's in it to win it. I love it so much. My favorite, he's got this little leg scratcher thing where it's like almost like a bug is trying to crawl up his leg and he's trying to get rid of it. I love it so very much because he's committed. You look at him, he's intent, he's serious. He's like, I got a role, I got an assignment. This is my moment. I have waited for this moment my whole life, and all you had to do was play the right song, and I'm in. He's not actually looking to the left or the right. I think this is fascinating that he's like dead set, eyes forward, and he's got his hands. And he's doing what he's got to do, not concerned about the person next to him. I've watched it enough times. He's even got the little shake at the end, you know? But you know what's interesting to me is that kid's not trying to steal the show. I really don't think he is. I think he just understood, like, he had a part to play. And he was committed to doing it the best that he could. It wasn't his recital. It wasn't even his moment. But I'm here. And I'm committed to this. And I mean, I feel bad for everybody else next to him, right? Like, I think I might have been his sister next to him, just like, all right, well, I guess I'm just going to do my thing. But even her, it's like she has a role to play. It's her recital. He hears the music and he dances with all his might. His connection is to something that's not around him, but something that's beyond him. And I think maybe that's what it takes for us too. People who aren't concerned with the stones next to them as much as we hear the song and belong to it. And we perform for an audience of one. Looking at others or even ourselves will cause us to shrink back, and we will abdicate our responsibility, our roles. But if we can hold on to them, remember the story, maybe we can play a part in the part we're supposed to play in the story of God. You know what I love about this passage is that there is this little bit of encouragement that, beloved, everything you are is bound up in Jesus. Not only is he the source of our life and our vitality, but he's also how we understand our work. We are so intimately joined with him that we inherit his status. He is rejected by man, and because of that, because of our union with him, so are we. But our rejection is because we're connected to him, you see. He is chosen by God, elevated by him, precious to him. And guess what? So are we. So are we. We feel small and insignificant. The work we do can feel fruitless and tiresome, and yet God sees it differently. The dream isn't the stone, it's the temple. It's the thing that God is building. And we are bound up in him. Because of that, we too are precious and living. And so while the world may count us out, and while we might even count ourselves out, God sees it differently. And if there's a discrepancy between what we see and what God sees, then who's actually right in that situation? While your work might not have any value in the eyes of the world, and our lives can be seen as a waste, we respond to an authority that is bigger than our own. And he chooses you, he sees you, and sees your work as precious. These stones matter because of the builder, what he's building, and for what purpose. And like we said earlier, if you look closely, there is more than one builder. There's more than one building. There's a building where God is the builder, and there's another one where he is not. And in that second building, Jesus is not only rejected, but an active hindrance to the work they're trying to do. You see, the world has its temples where its gods dwell, of consumerism and power and violence and domination, materialism. And there, those people make their sacrifices to their gods and become like them. But there is another building, a building where God is the architect, a temple where he dwells and rules. And in the same way that Israel is called out to be a light to the nations, so are we, the people of God, called to be a light to the surrounding world. Your microchurches are stones in the temple of God. Your humble, ordinary expression of the church is a testament to the people a people that have knowingly and unknowingly colluded with death and the devil, that there is an alternate way of living and being in the world. You are signs and foretastes and instruments of that vision, of that kingdom. Every Bible study, every gospel presentation shared, every meal shared or door open is a part of the pebble that is going to construct something bigger than you can imagine. The household of God. Everything matters. In the world we know, addicts die and women are raped and the poor are forgotten, but our dreams are never just for the stone, it's for the temple. For Revelation 21 and the day where the dwelling of God will be with man again. And there will be no temple in that new heaven and the new earth because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb will be our temple and everything will be made new. I think it's important to say that I don't think there was anything wrong with our dreams of trying to reach every student at the University of Tampa. I think it gave us fire in our bellies, especially because it seemed so possible. And we need dreams that are bigger than the sky. Dreams that compel us to move. But we also dream knowing and understanding that the point of the game is to just keep playing. It's an infinite game, and we can add to that landscape. To the thirsty, I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life, Jesus says. To those who are victorious, they will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. I think what's amazing is that even if we abdicate our responsibility, it's not that it changes the victory of God in the world. God will be victorious regardless. But we will miss out on something valuable for us. And this morning, I'm reminded that we still have work to do. At the tail end of last year, we conducted a survey of the network because, part of the gift and the challenge of a network like ours is that you never really know how many people are actively involved in the underground. So you go to maybe a traditional prevailing model church, and they can tell you who's on their membership roster and how much they're running on a Sunday. And for us, that means very little to us. Not just because it's just a wrong metric for us. It's not how you measure things. And yet it's still important sometimes to know how can we serve the movement. The centralized underground exists to serve you as microchurches. And so a part of that is knowing where you are and what your needs are and what impact you're having and how we can be of service to you. And so actually in this foreground, I think, what page is this? Page 22. You'll find this graphic, and it kind of has some of the results of that survey. And so part of what we found is that there are more than 120 microchurches in this network. In fact, according to this foreground, there's 162. And this you won't find in the foreground, but in our research, we found that the average number of people involved in a microchurch, this is people who come less than 50% of the time, was 25. 25 people on average. It's the average number of people involved in a given microchurch. Was it more than 50%? Okay. Well, all right. I have different numbers and stats in different places. But either way, you do the number, you do the math. That means 4,000 people are involved in microchurches. You look at this foreground, average impact is 62 people per microchurch. Of 162 microchurches, that means 10,000 people are impacted by microchurches. That's insane. And we have this gathering here around us. Jeremy mentioned at our retreat that, we're the biggest megachurch that no one knows about, including ourselves. And it's true. And yet, there are still 3.2 million people in the Tampa Bay region. For all the diverse mission we have, there are still groups of people that we're not reaching. We have not confronted every evil in the city. I just can't help but wonder who is going to reach the artist, and who is going to care for those in hospice, and who will care for the shut-ins and the elderly, who will love the underestimated and the undervalued youth, who will reach out to first responders and law enforcement officers, the kava drinkers, the foodies, the dog walkers, the yoga enthusiasts. All these people exist in our city. How do we see the knowledge of the glory of the Lord cover Tampa Bay as the waters cover the sea? It means we need everyone operating at their full capacity. We have 160 something microchurches in our network, and our city needs thousands of them. I'm reminded of Howard Thurman, who said, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because the world needs people who have fully come alive. And I want to amend that statement. I want to say what our city needs is a church that is fully alive, fully activated. Before the underground started, before it was even a thought in our minds, we spent time praying, not just for this thing, but for the body of Jesus and his bride in the city of Tampa. And so we interceded for any church, every church, that God would be exalted and glorified in those churches. And that is still our heart. For the last 50, we did the math recently. We said, we counted, and over the last 15 years that the underground has been a thing, we have seen over 1,000 microchurches started. 1,000. So we began to ask the question, what is the next mountain for us to climb? Now that microchurches are being socially accepted and believed in, what do we do now? If part of what we did with the underground was something that no one else was doing, what's the thing that we can do now? How can we continue to be the living stone that God has called us to be? And we felt like in our time as a senior leaders community, this isn't a thing for everybody, but we just felt like, man, what if we could give ourselves away to the bride of Christ again in a new way? And to come alongside churches who are wanting to plant microchurches. And so if you look at the foreground, you might notice that Lucas is making a small shift in his role. He's now kind of translocal director because so many churches are reaching out to him and asking him about how do we start microchurches. And so we said we want to be a gift to them. And so Lucas is going to be working with churches not just in Tampa, but around the world. It's a small shift in his role. But I think, as talking about infinite and finite games, essentially what this is, it's a just cause. What's the thing that a future that you hold on to, you hope for, you believe in so much that you're willing to do unconventional things to get there? And I think for us, it's the kingdom, right? To see every man, woman, and child have repeated access to the gospel of Jesus. What if every neighborhood in the city of Tampa, could have microchurches in them? Every zip code have some sort of a body of believers, of microchurches in those zip codes. 3.2 million people. We're reaching 10,000. We need more, so much more. But in order for the underground to be the living stone it's meant to be, it means your microchurch has to be the living stone it's meant to be. And I'll call up the worship team at this point. Thinking about this, I was reminded of a lunch I had gotten with Pastor Darrell from Living Faith. Some of you know Pastor Darrell. Pastor Darrell is brilliant, like the smartest man I've ever met. Like maybe easily the smartest man in any given room that he enters. He's spoken at a number of our events, conferences that we've had. And if you've ever had a chance to listen to him preach, you're just like, oh man, you are next level. Like, what planet are you from? And so I remember I reached out to him about something. I can't quite remember what, but we were sitting down and we were having lunch and kind of tracking his story, like how he became the pastor of the church that he was at. And, it was really fascinating because, okay, just for a frame of reference, for comparison's sake, people think I am well read or something occasionally. They say, "Oh, you read a lot, and there's a lot of things that you've read." I sit down with Pastor Daryl. He asked me, "Oh, have you read this?" And no, I have not. The man reads commentaries and church history, and like, yeah, he's like, "Did you read the Institutes from John Calvin?" I did not read the Institutes from John Calvin. Maybe one day I'll be Christian enough to actually give it a shot, but I'm not there yet, not even. And so y'all think I read a lot. He's on a whole nother level. But I remember talking to him and asking him his story. And he said to me that, part of what he was doing when I think he was maybe interim pastor, there had been some transition in his church. But his heart, his goal was not to be a pastor, actually. He wanted to be a Bible scholar, which when you hear him speak, you're like, oh yeah, 100%. That makes total sense. But he wanted to be a Bible scholar, and that was the track that he was taking with his life. And there was one day in particular, I think he was in an airport. We were talking about airports earlier. He was in an airport getting ready to catch a flight. And he felt God prompt him and ask him, what if, or if I asked you to just be a pastor of a small church, to disciple, to preach the word faithfully for your entire life, for the whole of your life, could you die happy? And it took him a minute, like it caught him off guard, like, I don't know. Could I? I think I can. I think I could die happy. And so he said yes to that. I think what's amazing to me about that is that, it's not this, it wasn't like he had these grand ambitions to be rich or famous. He had something that was already a God-honoring dream. And yet God said, that's not actually the role you're supposed to play in the construction of my temple. I want you over here. Can you do that? And he says yes to it. And we have been blessed by that obedience, by that faithfulness. I think you can only do that when you recognize that you are just part of the bigger thing that God is building. And you can say yes to your assignment. This morning, I don't know where you are. I don't know if you're discouraged or if you're having a wonderful time. And let's be honest, microchurch life is dynamic. It can go from one thing to the other in a matter of seconds. But maybe the call is the same this morning, to dream big, to have big dreams, to remember the eschaton, and yet also play your part. Be okay with playing your part. Lead your microchurches as God would have you to. Help people discern their callings, right? Provide spaces for them to step out in a mission. Empower and release people to play their part in the construction of the temple. But dream big, because the God that we serve is exceedingly and abundantly more able to do more than what we ask for and imagine. Next week, we'll be taking a deeper look at some of the core documents that make us a living stone, this priesthood, this temple. Because core to what it means for us to be this temple is the ability to look at those things and with sobriety to look at each other in the eyes and say, I'm still in. And I'm still with you. And this is our heart. And this morning, as you come to the table, it is a recommitment to be who God has called us to be, to leave behind our insecurities, to embrace who we are for the sake of the kingdom. This sacrament anchors us in the infinite game that is the church, that precedes us, that will outlast us, but that we have a part to play in. This morning, as you come to the table, we remember the story, our hope for the future, and we say yes again for the sake of that hope.